I'm about to head into the Quarter Up Bar and Arcade here in the Valley of Akron, Ohio. I haven't been in here a while. I'm excited to go back in and buy some dinner and give them some support. When this place showed up, I was just extremely happy to see it here. There's a 16-bit arcade up in the Cleveland area, which is about 45-50 minutes drive north of me. This place is literally about 4 or 5 minutes away from where I live. I can technically walk there. I was just happy to see this here. To have something classic retro arcade vibe makes you realize you're not the only one with this type of nostalgia. Some of the games they've got Street Fighter 2, Mortal Kombat, Killer Instinct, the Ninja Turtles arcade game, the original. They've got the X-Men game, Spider-Man. So you see there some great shooters like House of Dead 2, Virtual Cop. They've got the original Mario Brothers, Metal Slug. In fact, a couple of my favorites actually disappeared. I think they might have kicked the bucket. There was a Marvel Superheroes machine, one of my all-time favorite fighting games, and there was a Tekken 2 machine, which, believe it or not, is actually my favorite in the Tekken series. It's not perfect overall. You'll find a few buttons here and there don't work. There's a game or two where I had to turn it on the second player side because the start button on the first player side wouldn't work. Other than that, it's a great place. It's a great atmosphere. Now, right now, what you're seeing is I was here on a Sunday at about 5 o'clock, so there's nobody in here. The first time I was in, it was, I believe, it was either Friday or Saturday. You could not move in this place at all whatsoever. You pretty much couldn't hear a thing either. It was incredibly loud, just everybody packed to the brim, having a good time. Now, as you'll see, another thing is there are a lot of pinball machines here. I'm definitely not really a pinball guy myself, but I got to admit, a lot of them are really beautiful pieces of work if you take a look at them. Okay, so that's the Quarter Up Arcade here in the Valley in Akron. Food's good, reasonably priced, great atmosphere. Come check it out. Hello everyone, today's game is Deathsmiles. Was originally released in 2007 by Cave. It was a Japanese arcade game which was ported to the Xbox 360. Now the version I'm going to be playing today is the Steam version, which you can pick up right now for $19.99 American dollars. This game is a bullet hell shooter, which has a bit of a Halloween occult type of a theme to it, so I thought it would be appropriate with Halloween around the corner. And this game is easily one of my favorite side-scrolling shoot-em-ups. As you can see here, there's a variety of game modes, score attack, leaderboards, training, so you can pick any stage you want to play, change a few parameters and whatnot, and basically practice some of the harder stages. There are a variety of game modes. The MBL is Mega Black Label, which is just an updated version of the game. The only things I noticed about it are a little bit of color changes in the graphics, and some things I did notice were a little bit faster. But the primary difference is that the MBL mode does have a 5th character to choose from, as opposed to the 4 standard characters. And as you can see here, there are 4 to choose from: Windia, Casper, Rosa, Follette, and Sakura. The tutorial mode here is pretty simple. Basically, shoot left, shoot right, bomb, that sort of thing. One thing I love about this game, there's no 2, 3, 4 hours of trying to figure out how to play. You just pick up the game, you start shooting, you start dodging. One thing I love about these old school shooters is that there's such an easy barrier of entry to just getting into the game. You just turn it on and you just feel like you're getting the full experience. Now what you see here on the screen is the orange shots, or what's called the suicide bullets. Basically, you're going to spend most of the game trying to deal with those things, filling up the entire screen, and each character has their own familiar, which in this case is this character's owl friend, and he works basically like a shield for your character. Think kind of like the orange orb in the original R-Type. It is not only helping you shoot with you, but also can eat those suicide bullets for you. So what you want to do is manipulate the familiar to be in the right spot at the right time to absorb the shots. It might seem overwhelming to you, but in most areas of the game, you can definitely learn, figure out what's the best way to get through every section. Maybe which side you want to start on. Do you want to move left? Do you want to move right? Do you want to go closer to the enemies, further away? And eventually you'll get the hang of getting through each area. Like you see here, there's a lot on the screen, but if you play the stage a few times, you'll eventually start to figure out some better ways to get through it. Now, you have a counter in the bottom left corner of the screen. When the counter gets over 500, as you shoot things and as you absorb the suicide bullets, it goes up. Once you get over 500, you can go into a power-up mode, and then your point multiplier will go up. Now, this is definitely one of those games where you're going to want to get your point score up. Not a lot of games nowadays are like that, so it's nice and old school. Every time you go through the game, you're not really worried about finishing the game. You have continues, they're infinite continues, you die, you just hit continue, and you start again right where you're at. You don't have to go back to a checkpoint or anything like that. So it's essentially the only way you're going to actually not beat the game is if you just turn it off. So every time you play it, you're going to want to do it better. And you're just going to want to challenge yourself. And again, the game does have replays that you can post online. So you can watch other people who have played the game and have just totally killed it all the way through and get some ideas as to how to go through every section of the game a little bit better. One thing I really like about this game is that everything about it is just incredibly satisfying. The hits are loud, the shots are loud, the music is loud. Everything is just kind of very satisfying and immediate. It's not one of those games where you have to wait for it to get good. Overall, this is one of my favorite hidden gems of the shoot 'em up genre. I had never heard of it, found out about it, and I picked it up, and I couldn't have been happier with it. It's a really satisfying experience, despite a few things like right there, which is kind of impossible not to get hit. Okay, so that's my retro look at Deathsmiles. It's definitely a game you want to check out if you're a fan of the shoot 'em up genre, bullet hell genre, or just games that are just extremely anime like this. Alright, thanks everybody, take care. In today's video, I'm going to be kicking off a new series on this channel that I'm calling Retro Fighters. I'm going to be covering a variety of fighting games across multiple console generations, including some of the more popular titles and some of the more obscure. Alright, let's get started. The first game in this series is King of Fighters 2000, which was released in the year 2000 by SNK and is the 7th game in the long-standing KOF series. At the time of this video, there are currently 14 installments to SNK's flagship 3 vs 3 fighting game series, with a KOF 15 currently in development. The first 10 games of the series were released 1 year after the next, all being appropriately entitled by year from King of Fighters 94 through King of Fighters 2003. Now, King of Fighters has always been in the shadow of the much bigger, much more well-known Capcom fighting game series Street Fighter, and as a result, a lot of people are relatively unaware of the King of Fighters series as a whole. Maybe they've never played a single one of them, maybe they've never even heard of it. And on top of that, today's game is also a bit overshadowed by other games in its own series, such as the more popular KOF 98 and KOF 2002, which are considered to be a couple of the best of the King of Fighters games. Critically, this game was never really praised as anything special. It was critically panned for the most part. However, I actually quite enjoyed playing this game. Having never played any of the previous entries in the series, I immediately appreciated the game's solid Japanese 2D art style and engaging soundtrack. Like the other installments, it features a huge cast including characters from other SNK titles such as Fatal Fury, Art of Fighting, Psycho Soldier, Akari Warriors, and Metal Slug. Now the single player game gives you the option to play 1 vs 1 or 3 vs 3, which is the bread and butter of KOF, the 3 vs 3. The new addition to KOF 2000 was the Striker system, which gives the player the ability to select 4 characters instead of 3, and assigning the 4th character as the team's striker or assist attack. Calling in the assist attack during the match can catch your opponent off guard and lead to interesting follow-up combos. Another welcome addition to this game, for me at least, was a far more manageable, adjustable difficulty level. Now, having never played KOF 99, I can say I recently played KOF 98 just yesterday on difficulty 1, the easiest difficulty, and I essentially threw in the towel before even getting to the boss. It's that difficult. It's really cheap old school difficulty, having the AI essentially throw you, and it just seems like there's no way to get out of it. However, when I went to record the footage for today's video in KOF 2000, I played the game on difficulty 4, somewhere in the middle. The difficulty is going between 1 and 8, and I managed to beat the game without losing a single match, to give you an idea. Okay, now for the fatal flaw of King of Fighters 2000, it's the story. Now, first of all, the game lacks proper individual character endings, only featuring a main storyline. So that means that by playing through again and again on the single player game multiple times with new teams will not result in a new ending. Normally in a typical fighting game series, with Street Fighter, you play it with Ken, you get Ken's ending, you play it with Ryu, you get Ryu's ending, and so forth. Not so much with this game. And another problem is, secondly, the story is actually very poorly told. The dialogue in the cutscenes is extremely confusing, and you feel as though you were placed in the middle of a movie with very little explanation. While it may not be the most celebrated KOF release, I still really enjoyed playing King of Fighters 2000. And yes, a lot of it had to do with the fact that this was my first KOF game in my collection. I felt like I was discovering years of fighting game history that I had missed this whole time, meeting long-standing characters for the first time, and having previously only owned the original Fatal Fury on the Super Nintendo. I hope you enjoyed today's inaugural episode of Retro Fighters. Let me know in the comments section below if there's a fighting game that you'd like to see me cover in a future episode. Alright, thanks for watching. Sega is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year, and along with that, they've been putting some good sales over on Steam on some of their games, including something called the Sega Dreamcast Collection Bundle, which includes 7 classic Dreamcast titles, and I'm going to be going over 5 of those in today's video, and in the next video, I'm going to take 2 of those and give them special attention in another video, so stay tuned for that. Now, full disclosure, this is super exciting for me because I have never actually played the Sega Dreamcast. I've never owned one, I've never even played one actually. So I'm gonna dive right into these games and let's get started. Alright, our first game today is Crazy Taxi. I had a lot of fun with this one in a short period of time. It's very much an arcade game in that it's a fast-paced, fun game that is a real pick-up-and-play experience. It didn't take more than a few minutes to get the basic idea down. You pick your character, you drive your car to one of the people calling for a taxi, then you race them to their destination as fast as you can. What makes it fun is a very video game-like absurdity to it, as you smash through everything in your way, get there in less than a minute, only to have your customer get mad, kick your car over how long it took you to get there. Your car has no health basically, so you can just smash in anything as many times as you want, just try to get in their way. It just slows you down basically. You don't have to worry about dying or anything like that. Another excellent feature of this game is the 90s hard rock soundtrack featuring songs from The Offspring, Bad Religion, and The Hooks. Now, the only real major disappointment I had with this game was its Crazy Box mode, which is essentially its challenge mode or trials mode. I had a very hard time figuring out how each challenge worked and felt that the game could have explained a little bit better how to do the Crazy Dash and Crazy Drift mechanics. In fact, later on after I was done playing, I actually looked it up online and figured out, yeah, I was doing it all wrong. I struggled with most of the challenges and eventually gave up and only finished a few of them. As arcade games have a tendency to be, it's a bit short. In fact, I'm not sure if there's really a specific end goal to the game other than to do better each time. The game is over after your time runs out. You're shown how much money you've earned, given a license letter score, and a ranking. While you could say that there isn't much to do in Crazy Taxi, I still found myself enjoying every minute of it. The more I played, the more and more I discovered the city and felt like I could keep playing to sort of master the roads a little bit more each time. Overall, Crazy Taxi is a short but fun game. Alright, next up is Sega Bass Fishing. Now, this one was a total surprise because I had zero expectations going into this one. And yeah, it turned out to be a real hidden gem material. This is very much an arcade sports game in every way. It has a fun announcer, bright color typography on the screen saying fish in loud big letters, and rock music literally kicks in as soon as you hook a fish and start reeling it in. There's an arcade mode and an original mode, and in the original mode, a lot of the game seems to be focused around selecting which bait you're going to use, which you can change at any time. Some of the lures stay on the surface of the water, while others sink straight to the bottom. And if none of the fish are biting, I would typically change my bait out, and it would usually help a bit. The goal is to catch as many fish as possible before the time limit runs out, and the game also keeps score of the amount of weight of all the fish combined, and that uses that as kind of the tiebreaker in comparing your score to the other competitors' scores. Theoretically, if you're just playing one player, they're just computer competitor scores. But yeah, overall, believe it or not, this game's actually kind of fun. Alright, the third game today is Jet Set Radio. Now, I hadn't actually played this game specifically before, but I did briefly, a long time ago, play its sequel, Jet Set Radio Future, on the original Xbox. For maybe about an hour or so, I had a roommate at the time who had an original Xbox, and I thought, if nothing else, it looked kind of unique to me with its art style, so I popped it in for just a few minutes. This game's presentation is a 10 out of 10. From its cel-shaded art style, its intense soundtrack, its unique gameplay, overall, it just has loads of character and personality to it. Basic goal of the game is to collect spray cans, locate all the walls and sides of vehicles and such that you need to spray paint, and perform basic stick motions to complete the paintings. Along the way, you'll have to deal with other gangs in the way, a police force led by a crazy guy who shoots at you with his gun in the middle of large crowds of people, and calls in helicopters to shoot missiles at you. The first time I played, I noticed right away the skating physics felt very good and authentic. Now, I roller skated, I think a couple of times as a kid, and right away I can tell like it actually felt pretty authentic, like I felt like I was on skates. Now, I do admit that the controls did frustrate me a little bit at times. Maybe it's just because I don't play skating games. I'm not really into Tony Hawk or anything like that. But yeah, the controls, they felt great, but they were difficult for me to deal with at times. Sometimes the camera angle and the way the graphics work would make it a little bit difficult to see where I needed to jump to or from. Another issue I had, you might have no way of seeing something that's coming from you off screen. You'll be spray painting something and then suddenly like a car would run into you, that sort of thing. Still, this game is so good at what it does well. I will definitely be playing Jet Set Radio again. This is a must-play for Sega fans.
Waku waku feeling. Can the GG save Shibuya Cho from the trap of love, or is it too late?
The next game is Nights into Dreams, which was originally released actually on the Sega Saturn, and the original version is selectable to play here on this version as well. This one is essentially, from what I can tell, the exact same game, just with better graphics. This is a very original game that was made by the Sonic team. It's my understanding that basically they made Sonic 1, 2, 3, Sonic and Knuckles, and then they began working on this one. It definitely has that Sega feel to it. You're flying for most of the game, moving either left or right in a looping stage, and the goal is to collect 20 blue orbs to proceed to the next section. It took a few minutes to get used to how you can see the background and foreground elements on the screen. I remember just seeing this game on YouTube when other YouTubers were talking about it. That was the thing that kind of tripped me out. Like, there's a lot in the background and foreground, and it's not always completely obvious what you're actually playing in, which can kind of fool you, because sometimes you might think, oh, I can get that item down there, and then you move towards it, and it's like, oh, I can't actually reach it. It's actually not in the playing field. Getting through the first 6 stages is pretty easy. There's a boy and a girl character, each with 3 stages. But then once you get through those 6 stages, you realize you can't get to the 7th stage unless you have an average C score rank or higher in all those levels. So basically, it's actually very easy to get there, but in order to get to the last stage, you have to go back into the old stages and do them a little bit better. Overall, this one is a very enjoyable experience while being very simple, which isn't a bad thing. Our 5th and final game today is Space Channel 5 Part 2. This game was originally released in Japan on the Sega Dreamcast and has also received a US release on the PlayStation 2. This game is simply put pure fun. It's a rhythm and memory game where every character in this game dances their way with every step. You square off against your opponent, watching and listening carefully, memorizing what they're doing. Then once you hear a sound signaling that it's your turn, you have to input the correct button combination back in time, just as you saw it and heard it yourself. It's simple yet genius gameplay, which I found incredibly refreshing. Just like all the other games in this collection, this game just excels at what Sega did best. This game has so much going for it with its presentation. The main character, Ulala, is terrific. Its colorful graphics, music, and the attention to detail in the choreography is stellar. Now, it doesn't take long for this game to get a bit difficult. You won't finish it in a heartbeat, and there are multiple new costumes to unlock for Ulala. There are some moments where I failed with my inputs and I wasn't sure why. Something about the timing of when to hit the first button after the signal that it's my turn crossed me up more than once. Also, sometimes when there were 2 buttons to hit in a row very quickly, sometimes the second button didn't register, and again, I wasn't sure why. Maybe I hit it too fast. Maybe it's just me trying to figure it out. I'm honestly not sure. Other than that, there are very few negative things to say against this one. While all of today's games are very good, Space Channel 5 Part 2 is definitely my favorite on the Sega Dreamcast collection. And it makes me think of picking up my own physical copy of the PS2 version someday. Alright, that concludes part 1 of my look at the Sega Dreamcast collection on Steam. In an upcoming video shortly, I'm going to be taking a look at Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, which is going to complete this collection. Alright, until then, take care, and thanks for watching. Hey everybody, Scott here. Quick introduction. This is another video that was a review on my old channel, just re-uploading it. This is my review of Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, playing the Steam versions of these games. It is part of something called the Sega Dreamcast collection on Steam, and hope you enjoy it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. First off, I'm going to talk about some of the positive ideas about Sonic Adventure.
First of all, I definitely appreciate the idea that this game didn't rest on its laurels. Like Mario 64, it didn't want to just do another side-scrolling Sonic game, so I appreciate that. I appreciate the idea that they tried to make more of an adventure game. There's people to talk to, places to go, there's side quests and that sort of thing in this one. I was keeping an open mind, although it was different. Right off the bat, and when I actually got into the first level, it felt great. The first level was super fun. I didn't think it was terribly difficult. It wasn't perfect, but I had a lot of fun with it, and I was very much into this sort of new 3D Sonic world. Played Sonic Generations before this. I'm aware of the game. It's been out for a long time, so it's kind of hard to put myself in the shoes of somebody who might have just be playing this on a Dreamcast for the first time. Now, from a console game standpoint, I do feel like giving the player a small open world can kind of give longevity to the game, give it a little bit more replay value. In fact, speaking of replay value, after I beat the game, I had unlocked several other characters to play as, which is kind of a fun idea. After you beat it with Sonic, you can go back and play the game as Tails, as Knuckles, as Amy, as Big, and as E102. And although I didn't play through the game as any of those characters, I did pick up Amy's game real quick just to see what would happen. And I noticed right away that she had her own unique cutscene, and she actually had some unique controls as well. She didn't have Sonic's spin attack. Instead, she had a sort of a hammer swinging attack, which I thought, this is a really good idea because it gives the game some replay value, and it makes me think, okay, I haven't actually finished the game yet until I play through it with all these different characters. So that's a very good thing this game has going for it. Now keep in mind this is Sonic Adventure DX Director's Cut. I'm not sure what the exact differences were from the original release and the Director's Cut version. There's a side game in this called Chow, if I'm saying that correctly. There are these little cute little characters that you can essentially raise, and it reminded me of sort of the chocobo breeding and racing in Final Fantasy VII, if I'm remembering that correctly, but I didn't do it myself, so I won't comment on it too much. Overall, I can say that the game pretty much throughout had a pretty consistent difficulty up until the end. It was not that difficult at all. And once I got to like the second to last level, I started to get a little bit frustrated. It was not very difficult to get through. It didn't overstay its welcome. I ended up beating this game in about 6 hours overall. And that's including a few times where I got a little bit stuck in the open world part of the game. Alright, now some of the cons of this game. Right away from the beginning, I noticed this game is super glitchy. Right from one of the opening cutscenes, I noticed there were some gunshots fired and no gunshot sound came out. I remember fighting Dr. Robotnik at one point and I was hitting him and I didn't hear any impact sounds come out, so the sound effects were very bad in this game. This game just has a very unfinished feeling to it. There was an airplane shooter stage, 2 of them actually, which was a great idea. Like, hey, there's like a shooting stage as a transition between one world and the next. But yeah, what ended up happening was the first one of them, I ended up passing through and I didn't get hit once. And I'm pretty sure there was really no danger the whole time. It was incredibly short. The second shooter stage was a little bit better, but overall, it just kind of lacked any real punch to it at all. It felt very lackluster, like it was underdeveloped. The pinball stages in this game, the same thing. It was a good idea, but at the same time, the controls just weren't very good. I felt like I was just hitting the ball in the exact same place over and over and over again. There was a bit of a bumper car race in this game, and the controls in it were bizarrely slow and sluggish. I felt like it was painful to move through. Now, I mentioned how incredibly unfinished and glitchy this game is, but there's actually an even bigger disappointment, which was the amount of time that I felt like I wasted just simply trying to figure out where to go next. I can't say I'm a fan of that in games for the most part. I just get frustrated if I don't know where to go next. There are clues in the game. There are things that you can talk to in this game that kind of give you a little bit of a clue as to where to go, but they don't always help enough as you might want them to. When I actually found the stages, like the next stage to go, because there are just a basic 10 levels to play in the game, once I actually found the next stage and I saw the screen come up where it's like, stage 3, stage 4, and I started playing, I actually got incredibly excited at that point because it was a huge relief. I finally found the level, and I would go through it fairly quickly and actually have fun doing it. I say my overall final thoughts about Sonic Adventure 1 is that It had some very good ideas. I enjoyed most of the levels, but the game is very obviously unfinished, buggy, and it was a little bit slow at times.
All systems, full power!
Alright, now let's move on to Sonic Adventure 2. Now first, for the pros of this game. Right away, I had an incredibly positive experience in the first half of this game, especially the first level. This had me thinking right off the bat, wow, this is way better than the original. The first stage, Sonic looked better, the sound effects were intact, and the game just felt incredibly fast-paced. I was really enjoying it. In fact, for the first few levels of the game, that was exactly how I felt. Very shortly into the game, you start to play as Tails, and you realize that suddenly you're playing as Tails, and your plane is essentially converted into a giant mech robot, and you're shooting guns, and this is a completely unique experience. It's a great idea. I was starting to have a lot of fun with this one. Then suddenly you're playing as Knuckles, and his stages are different too. It was a cool idea. Now in Knuckles stages, what you do is you find 3 hidden emerald shards, and once you find all 3 of them, the stage ends. The game does give you a little bit of a sound effect that kind of dings in your ear a little bit when you get close to one, so it gives you a little bit of a help in that regard. There are these little TV screens that give you hints that you find along the way, and you talk to it, it gives you a little bit of a hint, and then it goes away. The game was not perfect. There were still a few times here and there where I died and I wasn't sure why. It was a little bit glitchy, it was a little bit unfinished, but nowhere near as much as the original was. It was actually a better made game in terms of the production quality. Now with this one, you don't have the unlocking of characters like you did in the original, but what you do have is at the beginning of the game you select if you're going to play as basically the good guys or the bad guys. And if you choose to play as the bad guys, then you end up having the same type of stages, only you play as Shadow the Hedgehog, Dr. Robotnik, and Rose instead of Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles. Which is again a welcome addition. I think that's a good idea, and it makes you feel like you would have to play through the game a second time in order to really finish everything. This one had the Chow side game as well, and again, I didn't particularly participate in that myself. There's a Sonic Racing side game that you can play in this one, and it was essentially just kind of a fake Mario Kart type of a thing. It was a fun idea, but admittedly it wasn't much. Now this game does have a 2-player battle mode. Now, I didn't actually play it, full disclosure, so I can't really comment on it too much. I would also say it's a positive in this game that I did kind of like the idea that it moved away from the open world. I was kind of relieved to know that it was just moving from one stage to another to another. There were cutscenes in between, so they gave you a little bit of story, and none of the story cutscenes took too long, so the pacing in the game from level to level was actually very nice in that regard. Alright, now for the cons of Sonic Adventure 2. Now, as good as the first half of this game was to me, the second half completely tanked. In short, basically, yeah, I absolutely thought it was cool at first that you can play as Sonic and as Tails and as Knuckles, and that all 3 of them felt completely different, they played completely differently. But here's what happened. In so many words, the Tails and Knuckles stages kinda overstayed their welcome. What was originally just a really cool idea that you can play as Tails on this mech robot, eventually it just kinda got out of hand. You end up spending a lot of time in this game playing as Tails. And eventually over time you start to get sick of how this mech robot that you're controlling, it has slippery controls, there's a lot of platforming, there's a lot of dying later on in the game, especially in the last Tails stage. I spent a lot of time on that stage, dying a lot, trying to get through it. And now for what is easily my biggest disappointment in this game, which is the amount of time that I ended up spending playing as Knuckles in his stages. Now, it started off, it wasn't a bad idea at all. The Knuckles stages, again, you're just finding 3 hidden emerald shards in the stage. Now, I mentioned that there's a little bit of hints along the way. They're not very good. The dinging sound that you hear when there's an emerald shard close by to you is actually incredibly annoying. And the TVs that show up that give you hints as to where to go, most of them aren't very helpful. You find a TV, sometimes they're on and sometimes they're not, and I never really understood why. Most of the time what would happen is I would clicked a button, I would talk to the TV, it would give me a vague hint, and half the time I wouldn't even read the hint in time, and the TV would just disappear and never come back, and that's it. Like, I lost the hint. I can't read it again. The last Knuckles stage in this game drove me crazy. In fact, the last 2 Knuckles stages in this game, I clocked in well over an hour of time on both of those stages. My biggest complaint with this game is that I spent so much time in the second half of the game playing as either Tails or as Knuckles and just thinking to myself, I just wish I could play as Sonic again, because this is just kind of slow. Like, the pacing with Tails controlling this mech was slow, and the pacing in the game with Knuckles, where you were just searching around a big open area, struggling to find where this hidden emerald shard is, it just slowed the pace down, and it didn't feel like a Sonic game, because it was slow instead of incredibly fast. Once I finally got back to playing as Sonic for the last couple stages in the game, I was extremely excited about it, but then first thing that happens is they ask you to play a reverse gravity stage as Sonic, which maybe isn't a bad idea at all whatsoever, but the execution was pretty poor. You ended up spending half the stage upside down with extremely frustrating camera controls, and most of the time I couldn't see what was ahead of me and I ended up dying a lot. The final stage of the game has Sonic riding on rails, which is kind of a cool idea, right? It makes sense. It's fast-paced, it's exciting. Well, yeah, but like a lot of the game, it was actually just kind of frustrating. I never completely understood the controls in this stage. There were times where I would hold left or hold right, tap the jump button, and I would jump onto another rail, and it would work perfectly fine. But then I would do it again, and Sonic would just jump to his death. Like, was it my fault, or were the controls of this game simply broken? I'm honestly not sure. At this point in the game, I admit, I was just anxious for this game to end. I clocked up over 10 hours in this one, just trying to get through it. The last few stages of the game were just incredibly frustrating. The extremely positive first impression ended up dying off very quickly. It just had this feeling like it was just way too slow, and over time, I admit, I just wasn't having any fun. All in all, I gotta say I'm surprised. After the way I felt when I finished the original and the way the second one started off, in the end, I ended up enjoying the original of these games more. It had a lot of strong points to it. It did a lot of things well, but a lot of things were just very poorly executed. It felt like a game that could have been great, it just was unfinished. Whereas with the second one, a lot of things were they were polished a little bit more. But yeah, the decisions they made, the amount of times that you spent playing as Tails and Knuckles, and the amount of time that I spent just trying to figure out where to go or what to get, the pacing in the game just snail crawled through the second half of Sonic Adventure 2, and overall, I can't say that I enjoyed the game. Whereas Sonic Adventure 1, I can definitely see myself playing it again. I don't think I ever want to go through Sonic Adventure 2 one more time. I'm very glad that I finally got to play these games after all these years of wondering just how they were. My feelings are definitely incredibly mixed. If I had to rate these games, I would give the original Sonic Adventure a 6.5, and I'd have to give Sonic Adventure 2 a 6. I'm a little bit unsure about that, but I don't know, to me a 6 is kind of like saying these games are very average. There were elements to them that were a 9 out of 10, and elements to them that were like a 3 out of 10. And when I think about it and I kind of average things together, they were very average games to me. So yeah, I'm interested to know, how did you guys feel? Did you like these games at all? Have you played them even? I feel like there's a lot of mixed opinions about them. I'd love to know in the comments, did you like these games a lot, or maybe were they very disappointing to you? Alright, thank you very much for watching this, and I'll see you next time. Hello everyone, this is Scott and thank you for checking out my channel. Today's going to be part one of a two-part series where I go over the SNK 40th Anniversary collection, which was released on the Nintendo Switch in 2018 and in 2019, then on the PS4, Xbox One, and PC. And the PC version is the one you're going to be seeing me play and all the gameplay footage in both videos. Now this one covers the 1978 through 1990 era of SNK, so this is pre-Neo Geo, so this is before Samurai Showdown and Metal Slug and Burning Fight and Shock Troopers and all those things. So this is going to be interesting because there's going to be a lot of classic games in the NES era that I probably missed out on, and I'm sure a lot of them that I've completely forgotten about. Maybe I rented back in the day on Nintendo, so I'm actually really excited to dive right into this, so let's go ahead and get started. Alright, our first game on the list today is Alpha Mission. This one is a sci-fi top-down shooter, and we'll see quite a bit of those in this compilation. Now this is one of many games at the time where you had a standard fire gun that went forward and a second shot that shot down on the ground as sort of a bomb. Now I enjoyed this one quite a bit on the arcade mode for maybe the first level until I got to the first boss and literally could not beat it. I literally was using the rewind feature and could not get through it. Yes, this game has a rewind feature, the SNK 40th Anniversary collection does, where you can hit a button and it just rewinds you back a little bit so you can cheat to try to get past things. But even with that, I could not get past the first boss in this game. So I tried the NES version, and the biggest difference you'll notice with most of the NES versions in this collection through the arcade version is that there's just not nearly as much stuff on the screen because just the limitations of the hardware. So the NES version it's a similar game, it just looks a little bit bare in comparison. On this one I was able to get to the second boss and the same thing happened, couldn't get very far in it. And then I moved on. Now the second game here is Athena. Now where do I start with this one? This was actually one of the main ones that I was looking forward to playing because Athena is a character that's appeared in other SNK games. She's one of the main characters I play in the King of Fighters series. So this was her first appearance from 1986, so I was definitely wanting to look forward to playing this one. I saw it on the PlayStation 4's shop and I almost picked it up at times, but I never did. So yeah, my overall impression is this game is really unique. It's got a lot of things going for it. It's got a great character. I love the graphics and sound. I love the Greek mythology going for it. I love the music for it. I love, the enemies. Pretty much everything other than the fact that it's essentially impossibly difficult. I would describe this game as harder than Ghosts and Goblins. I would describe this game as something that you would want to play maybe for an hour and then realize that it's really just not worth your time. The NES version isn't nearly as well known or respected as the arcade version, but admittedly in the NES version I was able to actually get to the second boss, whereas in the arcade version played it quite a bit and couldn't get past the first, so I at least had that going for it. But other than that, I'd say I'm glad that I played it. I enjoyed it for a little bit of time that I did, but I can't say I'm going to stay a whole lot with this one. Beast Busters is the next game. I gotta say, I love that name. First of all, this is a first-person rail zombie shooter, which kind of predates similar games such as House of the Dead. I have to say right off the bat, I was a little excited at the start of this one because it was, first of all, it's an excellent impression. It's got some great graphics and some cool stuff going on. It's immediately satisfying, and it's got some zombie shooting, some zombie dogs, and things blowing up for no apparent reason, and it's a little bit on the quirky side as well. I didn't notice it right away, but eventually I realized, okay, these are zombies actually shooting guns back at you, which is a little bit weird. I thought it was a little bit hilarious in the first level, the amount of zombie dogs that were just overwhelmingly jumping at you and blowing up on hit, and some of the character designs, or creature designs I should say, with like say this boss right here. Yeah, I don't know. Now overall, I had fun with this one, but there's one real huge fatal flaw to it, which is the hypersensitivity of the aiming reticle. Now I'm playing this whole thing on a PC with my standard PS4 pad, and just using the left analog stick around a bit, tapping it a little bit to the left or to the right, basically sent the reticle flying all the way to the far left and right side of the screen. So trying to actually follow anything and really aim carefully
was actually a very painful and exhausting experience. So once I actually got through it, I did beat this one, but after I did, it actually felt like a relief that I was done and I was moving on. Bermuda Triangle is the next one, and it's another top-down shooter, and this one I actually enjoyed a lot more than Alpha Mission. I was able to get a lot further in this one. Actually, I found that this one had a fairly balanced gameplay to it. It didn't feel too overwhelmingly difficult or frustrating. In this one, there is a little bit of a way of incorporating the whole idea of the Bermuda Triangle into it. Occasionally you would get sucked into this black triangle and then you get sucked into this other area, but it wasn't really incorporated that well, because what would happen is you would just play it for a few seconds, you would get hit, you would get shot and killed, and then you just go back to the regular stage and continue on. So while it wasn't anything incredibly memorable, I definitely did enjoy this one. Next game is Chopper 1 or Chopper I, I'm not sure. This was an arcade game from 1988, another top-down shooter. This one, my first impression of it was not as great. This is one of those shooter games where I'd say it really could have been a lot more satisfying if the shots went farther on the screen and if they were a little faster or more powerful. It was okay, but there were times where I definitely felt that it just wasn't worth the effort to try to get past things. Felt like I was dying too quickly, and it wasn't that far into the game where I felt like the bosses were just getting impossibly difficult, so I ended up moving on pretty quickly after this one. Crystallis. Now, this is a classic NES title that you may have heard of before. This game is oftentimes compared to The Legend of Zelda. In fact, some people would go so far to say it's even better than Legend of Zelda. Now, admittedly, I did not play this one a whole lot, and I did play it just a little bit as a kid back in the day as well, so I can't get real deep into details here because, just wanted to get through these games and do this video. But this game is very well regarded by a lot of people as an excellent game. One thing I will say about it, though, is when I played it, I had the same exact thing happen to me as I had when I played it as a kid, and that was that I had no idea how to get past the beginning. I just fought for experience a little bit. I bought a couple things and I couldn't figure it out. I ended up eventually going online and figuring out what I was doing wrong all these years, and it was eventually I was like, oh, okay, I had to go in the inventory and use this item or whatever. But yeah, it just had that kind of frustration where I just felt like I just wanted a little bit more of a hint, a little bit more of an explanation, that sort of thing. But I will definitely come back to this one eventually. Next game is Fantasy. Now, this is from 1981, so this is super old school. And this game overall is actually very, very different. This one's definitely not an action game or a shooting game or anything like that. The selling point for this one is that it kind of took the player through a variety of gameplay types, where you're just doing things like controlling and landing a balloon, or just moving through obstacles, trying to do, I don't know, maybe non-typical video game-like things. So you just have this guy trying to save his girl, basically, for just getting swept away or whatever. And it takes you through a few variety of different types of gameplays. Now, when I first played it, I didn't have a great strong impression, but I went back to it again, and I figured out the second time. I started to get the hang of it, and I used the rewind feature a little bit. It definitely helped in this one, and I ended up enjoying it a lot more the second time through, and I finished it. It's actually very short. It's kind of short and sweet. It doesn't overstay its welcome at all, and yeah, in the end, I actually enjoyed this one. Guerrilla War. Now, this one has both an arcade and console version on here. I definitely played this one on the NES back in the day, and I remember renting it and remember enjoying it. One of the reasons why is because, well, it's in both versions, it's just kind of fun, action-packed, and just throws you right in, and you're just shooting a bunch of enemies, and it's pretty straightforward and satisfying. And with the arcade version, it was nice to finally play it and to really get the idea of how the original game went, but still, I gotta say, my heart is definitely with the NES version in this one. And I realize now, looking back, one of the reasons why is because the game gave you continues, and you start up right as soon as you die, right where you left off. So it's not, it's some impossibly difficult game. It sends you all the way back to this really unforgiving checkpoint or whatever. So yeah, to this day, I can say I still really enjoyed it. It's a little bit exhausting. You have to move around a lot. It's a lot of work on your left thumb, so it's not perfect, but in general, I have good memories with this one. And also, I gotta say, the NES cover art, that's absolutely awesome. Okay, so next up, we're going to look at the Akari Warriors games, all 3 of them. And all 3 of them here have an arcade and console version. So now starting off the bat with the original, the arcade Akari Warriors, well, where do I start? At first started playing it, you just notice right away it's super slow, and it's just very difficult to move your guy. If you just moved a little bit faster, maybe it would just feel a little bit more comfortable. At the beginning of the game, it took me a while to realize that I had grenades, and at first I couldn't even get past the first few guys that were on the screen. I eventually figured that out. I made it a little bit of ways into the first level, not very far, and then I pretty much just gave up. I wasn't terribly interested. Now going to the NES version, this one is, how do I say, a very notoriously rough port. The legend has it, if you go into the museum portion of the game, of this compilation, it explains that essentially they lost the code for the original arcade game and had to basically just play the arcade game and figure out what they did or something like that, and they basically had to recreate it. With the limitations of the NES hardware, there's not nearly as much stuff on the screen. This is generally believed to be a notoriously bad port of the game. Okay, now Akari Warriors 2, also known as simply Victory Road. This one is actually, in my opinion, way more fun to play. This is, top-down, just action. It plays pretty nicely and easily, and this one is a little bit weird because it takes the main characters, whose names are Ralph and Clark, by the way, or Vince and Paul, if you prefer the American market renames. Or if you prefer just Red Guy and Blue Guy, which I think is what we sarcastically refer to him as, but it takes these characters into a science fiction environment in this one, so it's a little bit different. And the NES version, I definitely remember playing this one back in the day. It's kind of notorious for its ABBA code, so because you hit ABBA and you continue and you do it over and over and over again, because there's a lot of dying in this one, and it's not a bad idea. It's just not the greatest execution in the world. They had some interesting ideas about, you actually had the kind of a money system, and you went into these like bar-like areas, and NES games back in the day, they would give action games some RPG-like elements, which is interesting, but the execution it was a bit rough. Now, Akari Warriors 3: The Rescue. Suddenly, all of a sudden, the series is a beat 'em up. It's a top-down angle beat 'em up now. You're not just shooting guns at everybody. And I say the arcade version of it looks pretty good for its time, and I played it a little bit, but overall, it did have a feeling of discomfort. It wasn't terribly comfortable to play. It wasn't like playing a Final Fight or Streets of Rage or anything like that. The NES version, I played it for maybe a few short minutes. I felt like the enemies were just kind of sticking to me in general. It wasn't terribly fun. I didn't think it was worth my time. And yeah, I'd say overall, this Akari Warriors series, it's weird because we all played these games back in the day on Nintendo, but overall the series, I don't know. I don't feel like it's that great. I feel like it's strange that it's as well known as it is. The arcade versions of the games are definitely better on all 3 accounts, though, I will say that. Okay, now the last game we're going to look at here in part 1 of my look at the SNK compilation of 40 years is Iron Tank. This is an NES game from 1988. This was actually a sequel to TNK3, which we'll take a look at in the next video. But this one it's got a cool idea. You're controlling this tank, you're going around, you're running into enemies, and you're blasting through some things, but you got a regular machine gun, you got a cannon fire, everything you'd probably want from a tank game from this era, other than more playable controls or anything like that. It wasn't really well made. The controls for the cannon were extremely clunky. I had a really hard time understanding why I was shooting the the machine gun in one direction and the cannon in the other. It's one of those situations where you look at it and it looks like just a standard NES game. What would the problem be? And then you play it and it's like, oh, it actually controls very, very poorly. So now, to be fair, there are fans of this game. I just wasn't one of them. All right, so that's my look at part 1, the first 12 games on the SNK 40th Anniversary Collection. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider hitting the like button and maybe subscribing to the channel for me. Other than that, I will see you in the next one. Hello and welcome, this is Scott here. Thank you for checking out my channel. Today's video is part 2 of a 2-part series where I'm looking at the SNK 40th Anniversary Collection. Now this is part 2. It's not necessary to have seen part 1 yet, but if you want to, I'll leave a link in the description below. That was when I covered the first 12 games on this compilation. Today I'll be going through the other 13. There's some great NES era classics on here from 1978 to 1990. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Alright, welcome back. The first game in part 2 here is Ozma Wars from 1979. So we're getting super old school here with this one. This is a Space Invaders style game from the time, which was all the rage. This was originally played on a tabletop arcade machine. It's a simple yet repetitive game, but I gotta say, you know, these old school games from this era, I really love these awesome classic vector graphics and just the old school sound effects of these games. To me, it's gorgeous, and I don't know, to me it's not something you would want to make all your games nowadays play as, of course, but you can say so much about where graphics and sound have come a long ways, but I really appreciate it for what it is. And I still enjoyed playing this one, even if it was just for a few minutes. Next game is Munch Mobile from 1983. Now this one's a little bit different. It gets the different category. You're controlling a car which has giant eyeballs on the front. I guess that's what it's supposed to be, and it's got these gigantic hands, human hands, coming out of the side of the car. You're just using the left stick, and you're just moving it right and left, and you're dragging this giant hand out, and you just have to reach and grab the fruit, or reach and grab the extra gas tank so you can keep playing, that sort of thing. And it's got some interesting ideas, like if you grab an apple and then it's like you're bringing it back in the car and you're eating it, and then you actually drop the apple core, and then you can like try to drag it into a trash can as you're driving along. You know, it's okay. You know, it's a little bit different. You know, it's pretty touchy. You don't want to touch the sides of the road. It's, you know, that type of game where you have instant death if you touch the side of the road. So it's a little bit tough. I played it for a little while, and you know, the second time I played it, I eventually got to a part in the third level where there was a pretty impossibly difficult turn to make, and even though I was using the rewind feature, and I just kept dying and dying and dying on the exact same spot over and over again. And yeah, that was definitely a quarter eater spot there, and at that point I kind of moved on, but it was okay. Paddle Mania. This one is kind of a tennis game, but not completely. It starts off, it has kind of an Olympic theme thing, even though it's not officially the Olympics. You can see it's inspired by it. And what's kind of cool about this is, since it doesn't just play like a regular tennis game, it actually has it has environmental changes from level to level. You don't actually get it past your opponent and score unless you get it past an open area, because sometimes with the way the graphics are, you'll actually have walls behind them and you have to hit it almost kind of, I don't know, it's like a Pong style. It has to go through the gap in the wall behind them. So it's a little bit interesting. I definitely prefer my sports games to be sort of in the arcadey like side of things, like this one. So moving along. Now the next game is POW. This one is a game that I played a lot on the NES back in the day, so I was excited to jump into this one. It's a beat 'em up, and it's got some pretty cool stuff in it, like picking up knives and guns and that sort of thing. And I always felt like the environments in this one really helped out the idea that you weren't just going from one point to another. It really made it feel like you were escaping from a prison camp. Now, the original arcade version, the one advantage that it had that it took out in the NES version was that it was a two-player co-op game. Since I am playing this, by myself at home or not with anyone else, that wasn't really an issue for me either way. One thing I will say, playing the original arcade version for the first time, is I was definitely disappointed by the programming of the AI of the basic enemies. As you can see here, if you just kind of stand there and not even bother to touch them, they just sort of walk back and forth. They walk towards you and then they run away really quickly. So what I realized was happening was I was just really frustrated because every single time I went to hit the enemy, they just ran away from me and they just ran back and ran back and ran back, and I just felt like I was chasing after them, and it was extremely frustrating. So I admit I only played this one just towards the beginning of the second level, and then I just moved on because I wasn't enjoying it because of the basic combat mechanics. Now, the NES version, I still have very positive feelings about this one. This one, it really improved a lot on the arcade version in some ways, because in this one, when you went into doors and open areas in the back of the stage in the graphics, you would actually find a hidden area. You can go in, you can fight a hidden enemy in there and find a power-up, that sort of thing. It actually added a boss at the end of the first level. I noticed that, so it was actually improving the gameplay in many ways. The fighting, it was way better. It was way more comfortable than I felt like it was in the arcade version. This one really kind of gave me this feeling like, like you were in some kind of a cheesy 80s action movie where you're trying to escape from a prison camp. I really enjoyed this one. I remember playing it back in the day, but the one thing about it was that it was definitely difficult. I definitely did not beat it as a kid. So this time with the save states and the rewind feature and all that, I'll probably go back into this one a few times and see if I can eventually finish it. Next game on the list today is Prehistoric Isle. Now, this game is from 1989, and holy crap, the first thing you notice is you are shooting pterodactyls. Pterodactyls who are very intelligently flying together in very robot-like patterns, as if they were in some sort of an R-Type game. But hey, it's a video game, and it's pretty cool. It's all right. Gameplay-wise, it's a pretty standard side-scrolling shooter. It's decent for its time. But overall, this one just has this presentation to it that just kind of wows you. This was 1989, and I have to say that the graphics on this one were absolutely stellar for its time. The final boss, the T-Rex at the end, it had to have been about some of the best graphics at the time. This game had great bosses to it. It had some interesting level design, and for what it was, I don't think gameplay-wise it was anything that I hadn't played before, but it was definitely interesting in its concept and its presentation, if nothing else. And even the end, I won't tell you, even in the end kind of shocked me a little bit. So this one was a fun experience. Next game on the list today is Psycho Soldier. This is another one I was looking forward to because this is actually the second appearance of the Athena character, so it's not actually a literal sequel of that other game. It's kind of a pseudo sequel or kind of spiritual successor type of thing, because it's a completely different game. The character is now no longer in a Greek mythology Amazon. It's now basically a modern day girl who's a bit of a pop singer. This one is kind of an action platformer. It's on rails. You basically hit the buttons up and down and you just move from platform to platform. It's kind of a button masher, quarter eater. It's not really the most intelligent game I've ever played. It kind of gets old over time, but I can't say I did enjoy playing it overall. Now, the major claim to fame to Psycho Soldier is that it's one of the earliest games to include a full-blown vocal track to its theme song. As a little bit of trivia for you, the Psycho Soldier theme song also actually made an appearance in the 2018 Super Smash Bros. Ultimate game as well. Now the next game is Sasuke vs. Commander. This is another super classic one from 1980. This is another game that was played on a tabletop arcade machine at the time. Now the different thing about this one was that it actually incorporated a little bit of story into the game, which at the time was not really the normal thing to do. You can just kind of see the evolution of games happening at this time. This was one of the earliest games to actually have a main character and actually give him a name and actually have a little bit of a cutscene at the beginning, even though it's just on there for like a second or two. It actually even has a boss battle in it. It was one of the earliest boss battles in game history. And as you can see, the environment actually had a little bit drawn on it, some vector artwork, as it wasn't, just a plain black background like your typical Space Invader type of game from the time. So these were all, it might seem like not that much for now, but at the time, these were all very innovative ideas. Time Soldiers is our next game. This one was an arcade game from 1987. Again, it's one of those games where I feel like, your basic shots don't go the full length of the screen. And I feel like if they just tweaked that a little bit, if it just felt a little more powerful and the shots just went the full length of the screen, that it would have felt a lot more satisfying. But overall, it was fairly decent. It was fairly fun. I did notice that the bosses were essentially the exact same thing over and over again. One thing that's really interesting about it is that with every time you beat a boss, there's like a warp area that you can go into or not go into. And if you don't, you continue on in this level. But if you do go into it, it takes you into another area or another time. So like there's a, like the Roman era, and then there's like a prehistoric era, and there's a World War II era and that sort of thing. Okay, now this game has one hilariously bad thing about it that I just have to show you. It has absolutely the most hilariously annoying and loud and obnoxious death scene sound effect in any game that I've ever played. Okay, the next game is TNK3, or TANK from Japan. This game is it's known as a precursor to Akari Warriors, in that the main character from Akari Warriors, Ralph, is actually the pilot of the tank, even though you're not actually seeing them when you're playing it. And the Iron Tank game on the NES that I covered in the last video is actually a sequel to this game. This one thankfully plays a lot better. In this one, your machine gun and your cannon, they still control independently, but in this one it actually works very well. I found this game to be much more playable, and it was actually a lot of fun. Now, it's my understanding, going through the museum documentation in this compilation, and the explanations, the story behind this game, that apparently SNK at the time in 1985 was facing bankruptcy, so they kind of threw all their eggs into one basket and tried to make this game as good as they could, and thankfully it was a success in the Japanese arcades, and it kind of paved the way for everything else that they've done after this. SAR Search and Rescue. This one is another game that on this compilation anyway, it plays like a twin stick shooter. This was from 1990, and this was one of the more fun ones on this collection overall. This one didn't have any kind of frustrating kind of old school limitations. Some of these older games, maybe they don't stand the test of time quite as well. Maybe they just feel too hard. Like, if I didn't have save states, I'd never get through this side of a thing. But with this one, is actually extremely playable, is extremely fair. It didn't have any type of obnoxious, impossible difficulty issues with it, that sort of thing. This game is definitely taking on inspiration from the Alien movies, which is, not surprising. A lot of games like, Contra and so forth were doing that at the time. I had fun with this one. It's maybe not the most memorable game on the planet, but yeah, this one was pretty cool. It had a bit of a jump mechanic that was kind of a lunge forward, that sort of thing. Next game on the list is Street Smart. I remember this game actually being on Sega Genesis cartridges back in the day. This was my understanding. This was the first SNK game that was on a 16-bit system. This was before, you know, Samurai Showdown, Fatal Fury, and Art of Fighting, and so many other SNK fighting games. I believe this was the first SNK fighting game. This one definitely plays more like a beat 'em up than it does a traditional fighting game, so to speak. It has that typical 8-way movement of a beat 'em up where you can move up and down as well as left and right and all that. It plays more like it's a Final Fight, Streets of Rage type of game where you're basically just on boss rage mode. The fighting mechanics are extremely simplistic, maybe not the most intelligent thing in the world. I can say when I played through the first time, I played it and I beat it, and I didn't think a whole lot of it, but I did play it a second time, and I did actually enjoy it a lot more. There's a little bit of a tricky rhythm to getting a combo off in this game. It's not terribly obvious, and at first it didn't feel like there was anything to it at all. I did start to get the hang of it, and I did enjoy the game in general by the time I was done playing it and beat it a second time. But having said that, it definitely fighting games definitely had a long way to go in terms of adding any depth to them. Vanguard, this is another really old school one from 1981. This one had the distinction of scrolling up and down, left and right, and even vertically, so it was a little more interesting and a little more ambitious for its time. And it also gave you the ability to shoot in 4 directions as well, so not just shooting forward, but you can shoot up, down, left, and right. Yeah, this one is, I don't have a lot to say about it. It feels a little bit straightforward other than those innovations that it had at the time. But again, I love these old school vector graphics and sound effects, and you know, I didn't play it again for that long, but I did play it a bit and I did enjoy it when I did. Okay, now our last game on the collection is World Wars. This one, I like to say we left the best for last, but we kind of left the worst for last. It's probably one of my least favorite ones on this collection. Your basic shots go very slowly and not very far. The movement is very slow, it's extremely clunky, and overall the biggest issue with the game is that it doesn't let you go the full length of the screen. You can see there's areas in front of you or behind you, but you go up so far and then actually there's like an invisible wall, which is kind of frustrating in the beginning. You first start playing it because you'll see like a power up in front of you and you go for it, and then suddenly your ship just stops and you can't actually see why. It just doesn't let you go all the way up or all the way down. There were times I eventually got to a point where I wasn't sure if I could even get past the issue, or you know, I just kept dying and dying, and eventually I gave up on it, and I didn't think it was worth my time. Now, before I end this video, I want to just take a look at it. I mentioned the museum a couple times in this video and in the last one. I think that the best thing about something like the SNK 40th Anniversary Collection is just gaming history. I love gaming history in general. I love the idea of just going into this museum section and just, you know, reading about the history of the games, checking out, you know, the classic artwork from the NES boxes and the sides of the arcade cabinets. They've got some old graphic design advertisements of how they promoted these games back in the day. Some, you know, old school artwork, you know, the concept art. To me, I really appreciate what they did. Because it seems to me like SNK, when they did this, they understood what they had. They had history here. People are going to be nostalgic for this. You know, like I played some of these games back in the day, but not all of them. And to me, I just love the experience of just reading up about this stuff and finding out about some history, some things I didn't know, and just kind of celebrating the idea of where games came from and how they've gotten to where they are right now. So I appreciate how they released this. I like the idea that they knew what they had, that they knew that people are excited about this stuff, that, you know, this is, gaming history is a real thing. People are really excited to celebrate this, and they're happy about the idea of it being preserved and moving forward, and even the idea of just having new players discover these games for the first time. I love that idea, so I'm really happy that they put this museum in here. All right, so that wraps up part 2 of my look at the 40th Anniversary Collection from SNK. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate you checking out my channel. If you liked the video, please consider hitting the like button and maybe subscribing to the channel. Other than that, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Hello everybody, Scott here. Thanks for checking out the channel. Today's going to be a bit of a talk video about retro gaming and what the value of it is and what the meaning of it is and what really makes something retro. Now this is a response video basically to a video that another YouTube channel did called Retro Rivals. If you're not familiar with their channel, check them out. I'll leave a link in the description below to their video where they asked a question of whether or not it's worth getting into retro gaming right now in 2021. And I wanted to tackle that and just tackle, there were some questions specifically that they asked in that video. And specifically right off the top was what you would consider something to be retro. Like at what point is it old enough to call it retro? And when I think about that question, the first thing that comes to my mind is it's odd, because what does retro actually mean? Because retro is in my understanding, that's actually short for retrograde. And it actually means that something is imitating something older, but isn't actually older. Like if something actually is old, you would call it old or vintage or classic, and something like that. But if something's retro, it would be like if you walk into like an 80s themed bar specifically, and you could call it retro because it's imitating something that's older, which is weird to me, because I think what's happened is, just my guess is that the retro game community has just kind of latched on to the word retro and just kind of accepted it, because it's like the game community itself is retro, but the games they're playing are old or vintage or old school, something like that. But either way, that's kind of just kind of the term that we accept. And to me, if something is retro once it's old enough for the people who grew up on it to be nostalgic for it. So specifically, like for me, I can say the first time I was getting experience playing something and thinking of it as like it was a retro thing was before PS3 even came out. I was already super nostalgic for I got another Sega Genesis, and I got another TurboGrafx 16 off of eBay, and I was already getting nostalgic for these things, and I wanted to get it back. Like PS3 wasn't even out yet. So I would say by the time something is 3 generations old, it's very much retro at that point in time. Because like right now, it's hard to believe, but it's actually like PS2 is 20 years old at this point in time, which makes me feel extremely old, because that's when I got out of high school. But yeah, I would consider that retro, because here's the thing. Not only are people getting old enough to get nostalgic for it, but that also kind of partially explains why, you know, the prices of things are going up. To reference another channel, Gaming Off the Grid has been doing these series where they've been talking about buying guides, like is it worth buying, you know, and collecting for like PS2 and Xbox and Dreamcast and GameCube in 2021. And here's the thing, like with the GameCube and with the Dreamcast, you know, their conclusion is, I'd say the same thing. It's like right now it's not very fun to collect for that compared to like a PlayStation 2 or an original Xbox, because the prices are like more than twice the amount. So for whatever reason, I can't explain it myself, the prices of their library in general, beyond just a few titles here and there, have become very expensive. They've become collector's items, and I think something has to be sort of retro for it to get to that point. I think if you look at a system's library and you can say, yeah, the prices have really shot up, then I think you can call it retro at that point in time. Because when something is 1 generation old, that's kind of when everyone's just jettisoning it. Everyone's just trying to get rid of, like, you can still get PS3 games and like early PS4 games are dirt cheap still. That's not going to last forever. Some years from now, not too long in the future, PS3 games, the prices are going to gradually start to go up over time. But right now, they're still dirt cheap because people are still sick of them. And like I myself, I can say like I'm starting to think of my PS3 again, but it's going to maybe take another couple years before I dive really back into it. But as soon as you get to the point where you're no longer sick of it, you're unsick of it because it's old enough at that point, it starts to get retro at that point in time. And then more and more people are starting to rediscover it themselves, and they're wanting to get back into it. And, you know, again, I can't explain the supply and demand as to how an entire system's library can get that expensive. I still remember I spent $12-ish on a Strider 2 on PS1 at an EB Games several years ago, and trying to buy it back now, it's like, you know, $130 on eBay is like an average price for it. So
that kind of segues me into the next question, which is like the monetary value of an old retro game or classic vintage game compared to modern games, because the question is kind of, I saw it on a Gaming Off the Grid video recently. They were talking about, the idea of, someone might be willing to spend, $60 on a GameCube game. They'd rather have that than a new PS5 game, so it's worth it to them, which is awesome if that is for you. But I think here's the thing: it's like there are a lot of arguments you can make for why people are kind of surprised that you would spend a lot of money on an old game. There are a lot of reasons for that. And one, as I think the simplest thing is, you go into a GameStop, what's going to happen? They're going to sell you on old games. Why? You're going to sell you on used games specifically, because used is always cheaper, right? Like, it's used, it's not brand new, so it would have inherently less value to it. So, it's someone's played this game before, it's dirty, someone's fingerprints have been on it, someone else has played it, so it would inherently have less value than something new. So we always necessarily think that something used would be less expensive, right? And we're still to the point where we're starting to get used to the idea that games are old enough now, and video games are still a very new thing, relatively speaking, and they haven't been around for like hundreds of years or anything like that. So we're not used to them being collector's items. We're used to the idea that, I still remember being able to get Super Mario World on Super Nintendo for $1 at one point in time. You're just not used to the idea that you would be spending $150 on an old game. You are used to the idea of, being able to get this many games on one disc and spending $20 like I did on this thing. So when we have these new compilations coming out, like Super Mario 3D All-Stars, or even just like the re-release of the original Turok coming out on PC and Switch, like, people argue about how do you price it. Like, a lot of people always argue like that's way too much money for a game that's that old, because they know it's old. The development team didn't just spend millions of dollars recently on it. They're not selling this brand new to recoup their losses. So why is it that it's that expensive? Those are a lot of the questions that come up through your mind. And I'll tell you this, I can tell you the last two games that I spent $60 brand new on a game. One was Samurai Showdown in 2019. I spent $60 on that. Why? Because it was a fighting game. I was going to play it online, and SNK fighting games are notorious for having terrible online play, so I knew I had to buy it right away, go on right away. I did. I played it for a couple of months. I put in 1,000 matches online, played the crap out of it. It was one of the best experiences on the PS4 that I've had, and I haven't played it since. So I got my money's worth out of it. Before that, the last $60 brand new game I bought was Marvel vs. Capcom 3, The Fate of Two Worlds, another fighting game I wanted to play online that had even worse netcode. That came out in February of 2011. So in that whole time period, I didn't buy any brand new $60 games. I had learned at that point that I can spend $60 on one game, or I can spend $60 on 10 $6 games that were, old Genesis cartridges, that sort of thing. So I just kind of got used to it. We got into retro gaming at one point, a lot of us did, because we realized you can get all these games super dirt cheap. People are getting rid of them. They don't really think of them as having value. We got used to that. And now that games are super expensive in some situations, like getting a physical copy of Symphony of the Night, we're not used to it, so it becomes kind of shocking that someone would spend that kind of money on it. Now, there's another issue there, which is, what is the value of collecting to you? Because I don't think it's just a matter of an old game, it's a matter of actually having the physical package, because this thing right here is just a PS3 disc. This is $20. All of these games that are on this compilation on original hardware, I have no idea how much that would cost. I have no idea. And in great condition, like complete in box, like I have no idea how much that would cost. So like Scott from Retro Rivals can spend all of this money on a Castlevania Symphony of the Night physical copy, and if he has a collector's mindset, he can do that, and that's great experience for him. I can say for me that I don't have a collector's mindset. I don't have the game room behind me. That's just kind of it's not in my blood, I guess. To me, if I can spend, a small amount of money and get a digital copy of a re-release of Symphony of the Night mixed with Rondo of Blood, another notoriously expensive game to find out there, and it plays well enough and I can play it on my PS4, absolutely am I gonna spend that much money, because I can still play the game. Like, the game is important to me. As long as it doesn't run really badly, it's not super laggy and running at half the frame rate, then yeah, I would absolutely do that. Heck, I like on my PS4. I like the PS4 controller. It's probably my favorite controller ever. That would work out great for me. So to me, part of it is the value of the game. Part of it is just the value of something that's old. It's a collector's item, and there's just something special to you to have it. And I understand it to some extent, because I can tell you, going back to my experiences of getting into retro, I can tell you that I know what it's like. I had the Sonic collection on PS2. I had Sonic the Hedgehog, the original game, on there. But at one point in time, I got another Sega Genesis Model 2, and I got a Sonic the Hedgehog cartridge, and I put that cartridge in that console, and I had a 3-button controller in my hand, and I had the 6-button controller as well, but that wasn't just as nostalgic. I needed the 3-button controller, and I just wanted to turn that button on, see that light come on, and start playing that first level. And there was just, even though it's like Sonic the Hedgehog, it's a good game, it's not the best game in the world, but it's one of my all-time favorite games for some reason. There's just something nostalgic about that experience. I can't explain it. So there's definitely a value there, and I think it's just different for everybody. It's very subjective. So that's kind of, I kind of segue into just the final thought, which I'm not really going to get into, which is just the value, not monetarily, but just inherent value of retro gaming. Like, is it just nostalgia, or is it really worth it? And I don't want to get into that too much, because I think that's another video. I think I could stack up easily, like, what's better about older games, what's better about newer games. I think I could easily do another video and really stack up reasons for that. But I would say I think it's part nostalgia, and I think part of it is really the inherent value. Because just like with old movies, there's old Cary Grant and Humphrey Bogart movies and James Cagney movies, these classics that, those movies still hold up today for what they are, even though, maybe some of the lesser known old movies at the time, only people who watched them back in the day would want to, but they're the classics in there, and they still hold up to this day despite the lack of technology, because it's still just great acting, great storytelling, great script writing, and that sort of thing. So I guess that's kind of my conclusion. It's kind of my long-winded conclusion. I would say yes, absolutely, retro gaming is still absolutely worth it in 2021. It's definitely not the only thing I do, but I consider myself a retro gamer first and foremost. All right, think that about wraps it up for today. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on this subject matter. What do you think about retro games? What would you consider to be retro? What's it mean to you? How much money would you maybe be willing to spend on it? What's the inherent value that you think that a retro game has compared to a modern game? And if you're interested in me tackling any other topics on this subject, please let me know in the comments as well. Other than that, please consider subscribing to the channel. It might help out a very small channel like mine, and I'll see you in the next one.